If you did get a 60-mark question on the effects of institutionalisation, as I said earlier, your AO3 would be focused in on the findings of research studies. You're going to need a couple here. And the big study in this area is Rutter et al. 2011, so that's one you really do want to know. So here we've got the findings and conclusions of that key study, and what we need to do is pick out some of the important information that will help us to weigh up whether or not these effects really do exist. In each case, the Romanian orphans were being compared to a control group of 52 British children who had been adopted from orphanages in Britain under the age of 2. And what we can see is supporting the all the different effects, they fell behind the UK counterparts in every measure. Okay, so 50%, more than 50% were malnourished and physically smaller, evidencing that particular effect. And from this information here, we can see that the longer the children were in care, the more their cognitive development was held back. So when the children weren't adopted until between 2 and 4 years, their mean IQ was 77, and average is about 100. We can also see that the extent to which the children recovered from the effects of the institutionalisation correlated to the age at which they'd been adopted. So again, the longer it was before they were adopted, the more severe and long-lasting the effects. So infants adopted after 6 months of age showed disinhibited attachment and had problems with peer relationships, whereas infants adopted before 6 months really showed disinhibited attachments. And we can also see that we had marked disinhibition in the Romanians adopted after 6 months, far outstripping the disinhibition in the other two groups. And out of this 26.1%, just over half of the children within this number were still showing disinhibition at the age of 11. So overall, this study does give us strong evidence that these effects of institutionalisation are something that are actually happening. However, quite an important conclusion that the long-term consequences may be less severe than initially thought from Balby's work, so his early studies into maternal deprivation, because those who were adopted from institutions before attachments began to develop, the effects in these children can be totally reversed. Yet, it is true to say the longer the child is in the institution, the more significant the effects are likely to be. Now, that would only give us one of our AO3 points, so it might be well worth at this point bringing in Siana et al. In 2005, who found quite similar effects. So 74% of the control group were classified as securely attached, but only 19% of institutionalised children were found to be securely attached, further supporting this idea that we get different attachment types and secure attachment types. And interestingly, 65% were classified as disorganised attachment types, so showing features of everything. Now, less than 20% of the control group showed disinhibited attachment, but 44% of the institutionalised group did. So we do have support here for the fact there's a high chance of children developing disinhibited attachment if left for long periods in institutionalised care. And as we have these two key studies, we can say that there is a weight of research on this side. You could also mention Hodges and Tizard, for instance, as yet another study which has shown this kind of effect. So you're getting that weight of evidence building up for it. However, we still only have 2 paragraphs, and what's more, we've only done one side of the issue, so we haven't got enough here for full AO3 yet. So then we need to think about what other kind of points can we make. Well, one of the key things is that both Rutter et al. And Zianouta et al. Are studies into Romania and Bucharest. And we have to be really careful drawing conclusions based on the outcomes of these studies. And this is because these studies and the areas they were taken in aren't necessarily representative of all different institutions, and it's really not clear that it was only emotional deprivation these children were suffering from. These orphanages were absolutely full of children whose parents may have wanted them but couldn't afford to bring them up, and who were forced to keep having infants because of the policies on having children under Ceausescu that were encouraged. It was meant to build the state to have more and more children, so it was impossible to get contraception, and poor families just couldn't look after these children. So they ended up in these places which were, as you can see, absolutely overpacked. Many children crammed into cribs, not enough care to look after them, not enough people to interact with them. So the effects that we see in these children may not be down just the fact they didn't have a primary caregiver. It can be in part down to physical malnutrition, down to intellectual lack of stimulation. So the fact that they had slow processing can't really be put down to the emotional deprivation. So these confounding variables got in the way here mean that we really can't generalise this beyond these very specific types of institutional atmospheres, beyond these areas rife with deprivation, to situations where it is purely the emotional attachment that is missing from a child's life. All that said, it does make it even more amazing then that these children were able to overcome the effects of what happened to them in early life, and that's a really positive feature that's coming out of this. But the point you need to make clear if you're doing this is that we can't necessarily generalise the results, and that's because of the confounding variables about the nature of the institution these children were in, which means we can't see a cause and effect here. It's a correlational study, even though we've got the control group. There's too much going on for us to be able to draw cause and effect relationship conclusions. So we have 3 potential paragraphs already. We have the one about Rutter et al.'s conclusions and findings. We have the fact that this is backed up further by Zianis et al.'s. You could do the point to do with confounding variables related to both of these studies. Or if you wanted to say something more positive out of it, you could potentially keep as your third point something else entirely, and that is real-life application. The importance of the findings from these studies cannot be overstated. They've led to real improvement in the lives of vulnerable children who haven't got caregivers who could look after them themselves. So, what the findings of the Romanian orphan studies have achieved is changes in policy that have brought about real differences in the quality of lives of institutionalised children. For instance, children nowadays would have a key worker assigned to them, and this is someone who they can relate to specifically, consistently, rather than being cared for by many different staff, so that secure attachment can form, and that significantly lessens the chance of the child developing disinhibited attachment and the associated problems long term with that. A second point that's come out of it is the policy of encouraging mothers to breastfeed their babies as long as possible before giving them up has been revoked. Now, in the past, that was thought to help them physically mature and be best for them, but now it's known that children should be given up as soon as possible, because then that can allow for adoption before the development of attachment at 6 months, and it means they don't have that secure attachment bond broken in the critical period. So this obviously again helps protect children from going through that quite traumatic break. So looking into the effects of institutionalisation, although those effects themselves seem to be very upsetting, what we can find is that we can actually stop those effects if we look after the children the right way from the very beginning. We also know that should the children go through many carers, should they be unfortunate enough to be placed into an institution where the new policies aren't being followed, Rutter et al. Have provided us with the evidence that with good, adoptive, loving